We always ask the cost of daring, but we never ask the cost of not daring.
You're about to hear something you don't hear often. Just start and let the work teach you. It defines why Jacqueline Novogratz has had such an impact on the world, and it's a lesson that applies to us all. I'm Jimmy Allen, and this is Founders Mentality, the CEO Sessions. Jacqueline is the founder and CEO of Acumen. It's a global organization that has directed capital, talent, and unprecedented attention to the places the rest of the world has quietly given up on. 700 million people reached. Markets built from nothing. In countries where nobody else wanted to go. But here's what strikes me most about Jacqueline. She's a visionary with an art for audacious ambitions. But she's also a realist that knows for each bold idea, she'll need 1,000 conversations to make stuff happen. To dream, you do.
So I was at this beautiful London lobby owned by one of my board members, and I asked my team to come up with a plan. And I actually said, I want $1 billion plan. Acumen had been investing in off-grid solar electrification since 2007. So now we're up to like 2021 probably, maybe 22. And I had seen how we'd gone from two guys with a solar light that we invested patient capital into, turn into 30, 40 companies that we had invested in, reach 200 million people with off-grid solar electrification. At the same time, I was going to the big meetings, like the COPs, knowing that from 2007 till whenever that date was, we as a world have been able to reduce the number of people without electricity from 1.5 billion to 800 million. So I just started to do the math. If one nonprofit like Acumen, with one mostly philanthropy, but then one for-profit fund, could reach more than 200 million people, why wasn't the world just getting the job done? My very wise team said given the development finance institutions and what we would be eligible for, we should probably start with $250 million, not $1 billion. And I very grudgingly agreed, and I'm glad I did, because we were able to then, a year or two later, start to put the pieces together for a $250 million facility that is taking on the 18 most challenging energy markets in the world, all of which are in sub-Saharan Africa, none of which have more than a 45% electrification rate.
Why did you go to the hardest possible place as a first step here?
We just were looking at the math, Jimmy, that if you recognize that now it's 700 million people have no access to electricity on the planet, 85% of those people live in those, let's say, 20 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, 85%. And yet no capital flows into those countries. It seemed almost elementary. Why wouldn't we?
And so from the lobby, what did you then do to build that community?
It was still rather rudimentary when I went to the COP in Scotland. And I walked into a meeting with the investor Chris Hahn of the Children's Investment Fund. And he asked me what was on my mind. And I said, what's most on my mind is we want to bring electricity to the 75 million of the hardest to reach people living in the most challenging markets in Africa. And he listened to me for a few minutes and then he said, I'm in for 10 million philanthropy. And I was sort of stunned by that. And I first started to tell him that he needed to wait till our business plan was more solid. And he said, that's not how I make these big bets. I'm betting on you. You've done the work. I see what you've done. You're going to make it happen. That $10 million investment gave me just a huge jolt of energy, as you can imagine, walking into the other rooms at the COP. Instant credibility in a world where so many don't dare, particularly when they hear that you're going to bring electricity to countries like Somalia and Chad.
Chris Hone didn't bet on the plan. I mean, the plan barely existed. He bet on Jacqueline, on her track record, on the weight of 14 years of showing up in places no one else would go. He bet on her approach because he knew that she had a hidden superpower. She had a clear vision of where she wanted to get to. And she'd launch 1,000 conversations and wouldn't take no for an answer. He knew the idea would leave the fancy lobby and move to the front line. And that's where we're going next.
The next big turning point was the next climate week before the next COP. So now we're in September, not even a year. And I brought together a number of the CEOs, higher level CEOs and number twos from the Green Climate Fund, some of the institutions we had worked with and really wanted to talk to about this facility. The president of the World Bank was there and philanthropists. And at one point, someone said, Jacqueline, this is the craziest thing that you have tried. What if it doesn't work? And it was one of those rare and wonderful cases, Jimmy, when the then president of the Green Climate Fund, a guy named Yannick, looked at me and looked at this table of 16 people and said, look, if she does half of what she says she's going to do, quite frankly, she's going to do more than anybody else has done. So why wouldn't we at least give them the chance to try? The $60 million that we raised on the patient capital side allowed us to move fast. So even before we closed the debt facility, we were able to experiment and move into new markets and really get a deeper understanding of what we had gotten ourselves into. I have a philosophy of just start and let the work teach you. Even though we were far into thinking we understood off-grid solar, and we do, these were very complicated markets, and they brought in new challenges altogether.
So how far from the lobby to just start and let the work teach you? How long was that?
Oh, weeks.
Weeks.
Weeks for saying like, okay, team, let's go. We're doing this.
I think what's extraordinary is it's so easy in listening to you as you tell the story to hear a story of just unparalleled toil as you go from an idea to getting your team on side to 1,000 conversations. And you're one of the few people that, when I say 1,000, it was probably 3. And yet you also have this philosophy of just start and let the work teach you. So you were building towards the grand vision while simultaneously just getting shit done, just starting with this. And I think it's important to understand that parallel, that all the time you were doing and learning. And so those 1,000 conversations, I imagine, kept getting more and more informed by the reality of what the team was doing.
Absolutely. And I can't stress enough the power of having that philanthropic facility to take the early risks and understand these countries. For example, Malawi had gotten a lot of aid until last year, but 16% electrification rate. It's a beautiful country. And yet when you go, what you realize is there's one industry, tobacco. That means there are no dollars in the country. So not only were we going to have to contend with 45% devaluation of the kwacha, which had occurred over the last few years and wasn't looking any better, but we would have to find a way that even if we got paid back, we'd have to then get those kwacha converted into dollars in such a way as to allow us to pay them to pay Acumen. We knew how to make the loan, but then we also had to buy the inventory straight from China in dollars. Then we turned around at the same time and did a currency swap. We got that currency swap guaranteed by the EU. And we thought, game on, let's go. Well, the company is taking off. It's done I think it's reached like 200,000 people with electricity. They have all the kwacha to pay us back. But even with the guarantee and the currency swap, there's still no dollars in the country. And so then what do? Well, NORAD, the Norwegians, had actually given us technical assistance money as a grant that they wanted to be used as a grant. I thought in very traditional technical assistance terms. But here was an opportunity to think very, very creatively, and all credit to my team. What they realized is that because of the currency situation, because of the economic situation in the country, it was still really hard to get more fresh inventory from China. But there's a whole level of damaged inventory that needs repair that could then be sold on a resale market. And so the team could go back to the Norwegians and say, hey, what if we used your grant money to essentially pay Acumen back? And then we can take the kwachas that are in the country to buy inventory in kwachas that will be sold in kwachas and start to build out a secondary market inside Malawi in service of solving this problem. And I'm just watching a level of creativity and collaboration that I don't think I had the imagination to predict when we just started. So now that we've closed the debt fund, where, it's regulated, we've got a different set of stakeholders that very much are focused on getting their money back. And they then behind them have all of the parliaments and governments counting on them. We are so much smarter, Jimmy, than we ever would have been had we waited the 2.5 years to close the whole facility before we did anything.
Most of us either will allow the specific to completely distract us from the vision, or we stay so visionary we don't have the patience to deal with the specific. How do you keep bouncing back and forth? Where the hell does that come from?
I've always seen the world in a non-dualistic way would be the language I would use. I think embedded in me is that soft heart and that hard head. And it's always been there.
I think you referred to it as the bull and the dove.
The bull and the dove. And they struggle inside.
You seem to run towards complexity because in that is the magic of solutions. And it's not to celebrate complexity, but it's just because I think you just always seem to go to hard places with the willingness to solve things.
When you are talking about markets for very low-income people, you by definition are talking about political markets, not just economic markets. Everybody thinks they have a hand in the lives of low-income people. Investors tend to stay away, but you have the governments, the charities, the mercenaries, the mafias that are going to sell at extortive prices. You have the family structures, the religious structures. And so breaking through all of that requires understanding complexity, which starts with deep listening, that you actually have to care about the customers that your companies ultimately are serving. They will tell you what they need. The market is a powerful listening device, but so is sitting with the customers. I was in Pakistan on a day when it was like 115 or 16 degrees out, and we were selling these off-grid solar lights across South Asia and Africa like hotcakes. And I was so excited. And I was sitting with these women in Bahawalpur. These women weavers were all sitting in the shade working. And I was asking them, hey, do you think if I could get a license to bring these lights into Pakistan, would it be something you'd be interested in buying? And this woman with like sweat pouring down her face, she leans forward on her haunches, and she looks at me and she says, we don't want a light. Bring us a fan. I said, excuse me? She said, it's hot. Bring us a fan. And I said, well, I don't have a fan. I have light. And it only costs $7 at the entry level. And your kids can read and you can stay up later. You could even work more at night. And she said, we work enough. Bring us a fan. Sure enough, that night, sitting in my little guest house, I couldn't even have a cold shower because the water was hot. I had this clickety-clickety fan above my head, and I just felt like this woman is so right. You go anywhere in Pakistan today where solar has totally taken off, you don't sell a solar system without a fan. So part of what the understanding, the embedding ourselves in complexity is really caring about who are the customers, what do they have to contend with, and are you serving them? When we finally closed the hardest to reach with 23 stakeholders that included individual philanthropists, foundations, impact investors, development finance institutions, the World Bank and the IFC, and Shinhan Bank, Korea's largest commercial bank, and there were a group of them sitting around the table in my house during Climate Week, so we were all stressed out, but we were eating a meal at home together, these very otherwise fancy people. We went around the table to remind ourselves, why are we doing it? And we were asking ourselves, can institutions build trust? Can a commercial bank build trust with the World Bank, with a nonprofit? And so at the very end, when I asked everybody, what is inspiring you?
That question right there, that why thing. In the face of all that complexity is a word we return to a lot in these interviews. It hangs over every conversation. Complexity is central to the Malawi story because it shouldn't have worked. On paper, it still doesn't work. No dollars in the country, 45% currency devaluation, a grant repurposed in a way no one's ever tried before. And yet, it did work. Because the team was already there, already in the market, already learning. It worked because dealing with complex things is at the heart of Acumen's model. It took me a long time to get my head around this. Jacqueline is truly comfortable in discomfort, and she's built a resilient organization that understands deeply that to achieve extraordinary things, you've got to navigate daily tensions. You've got to embrace complexity. You can serve inefficient, broken markets and still build a model that scales. You can do good and make returns for shareholders. The dove and the bull. And there's a tension here between scale and intimacy. Jacqueline built a repeatable model to bring solar to the hardest to reach. And then a Pakistani woman in 115-degree heat says, you got the wrong product. Jacqueline listened and she brought a fan. That's delivering difference from intimacy. And by solving these tensions better and faster than others, Acumen is changing the world. But there's another part to this. To master complexity, it takes resilience. It's hard. It takes inner strength. Jacqueline understands this. The why needs to be so bold, so good, so worth it. If you're going to devote your time doing the hardest things, you better make the journey worth it. If someone asks you, why do you bother? You better be able to answer this. Because we dare to change the world. In our interview with Kevin Lobo, he stressed that we need to change the question. It's not what if we're wrong. It's what if we're right. Jacqueline's version is a bit different. When you set out to do something that bold, it's not what if we're right. It's what's the cost of not daring. The why. It's worth it. But it's so easy to forget the why. At that candlelit dinner table, someone was about to bring the room back to the question of why.
A woman who essentially controls a lot of climate finance. She said unexpectedly, tonight is Rosh Hashanah. And in the Jewish faith, this is a very important night. It's the New Year. It's the night we celebrate light. And as we've had this meal together and had this very unusual conversation for a group of institutions like we are, I realize the power that we have come together, and that sometimes through all the fights, we may have forgotten the why of it, but we have come together because we believe that it is only when the least among us have access, have light, that we're building the world we're all proud to be part of.
I love the phrase of we're so often forgetting the why, and that resilience is about returning to the why. I think you would say that's necessary but not sufficient. The why better be a good why. Can't just be power. It can't just be profit. It's got to include dignity in what you do.
One institution, not for Hardest to Reach, but for an earlier fund, called me to her office because she felt that she had such respect for Acumen, but that she had to tell me personally that their investment committee had turned down this investment in us. And this is an institution set up for solving poverty. And I asked her why, and she said, "This is going to sound funny, Jacqueline, but we actually had a debate about Acumen and specifically about you, that if you got to a crisis and you had to choose between the poor and your LPs, people thought you would choose the poor." And I said, "Are we really having this conversation? Do you not think we're smart enough to choose the mission, which is to ensure that we have long-term profitable companies that are solving problems of poverty, and yes, choosing low-income people, but at the same time, ensuring that we get returns to our LPs? If you don't think we can hold those two tensions, then it's not that me who is being questioned about being in this business. I would ask you if you really want to be in this business."
One thing that is very distinct is I think you have a very good but different view about the role of complexity than I think a lot of leaders do.
Jimmy, with big corporations often, I have met incredibly visionary CEOs, and they want to partner with us to help build more inclusive, sustainable supply chain. They believe it. They're in it. And then we interact with the system. And the head of procurement doesn't want to give up 5 basis points. And so then we spend months convincing the head of procurement that we can make this work. But then you get to the country leader. Then your head of procurement gets changed. And so we have to build that why, and we have to find ways to integrate it through the many layers of a corporation.
One of the things that's so clear from the way you talk through this, it's, I will embrace the tension. I will recognize that it's the bull and the dove that need to work together. What I won't do is compromise some of the measures against a whole host of others. So it is not enough to just say we want to have dignity in our supply chain if in the same meeting we can trade that off against cost, against HR, against legal, against judicial, because then we're not saying that's important. It's just one of the things we'll talk about. When you really return to the good why, there is also a hierarchy of what will be measured by and judged by as leaders.
I think you have said that so beautifully. And we are constantly in that tension. I will say our capital is patient. It is not stupid. That what does it mean to build dignified jobs? I think that's what we all want. But we lack the courage to make the decisions that go against the bigger current.
I loved your phrase at one point. We don't have scarce capital, we have scared capital.
And we always ask the cost of daring, but we never ask the cost of not daring. How will the world be different or the same if we don't try? How might it be different if we do?
Jacqueline, look, and I know you do a lot of training, but you've got a track record. You can have 1,000 conversations because you can enter 1,000 rooms and everybody knows you. But what do you tell to someone who shares your ambition, but they're just starting?
I was just sitting with some of the Acumen fellows. And as I was looking around the room, I realized they look at me now and think, oh, it's all easy for her. She knows everybody. She can raise all this money. Let me take you back, not to when I was 25. Let me take you back to when I was 40 and I had no money and I didn't know anybody and I wasn't really sure what I was doing, but I was told for 10 to 12 years, so into my 50s, that the idea of patient capital was not a great idea. In fact, that many thought it was a stupid idea. It was painful, it was lonely, and there were nights when I thought maybe I wasn't right. And that's the stuff you got to get over. That's where you have to realize that if you don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. So keep trying. I say to young leaders, I definitely tell them to just start. And when you fall down, get your ego out of the way, because ultimately, the people who stay in the game, particularly the game of changing a status quo that by definition does not want to change, are the people who have the courage to get back up.
Jacqueline's message is pretty simple. Just get started. Don't wait for certainty. Don't wait for the plan to be ready. Start and let the work teach you. But you better have a why that's worth the fight, because sometimes doing the hardest things is complex and there are tensions to be managed, not ignored. We've got to create an organization resilient enough to embrace tension and fall in love with complexity. Be the dove, but also be the bull. That question, how might the world be different if we try, is available to every leader in every room. But most of us, we just don't ask it. Everything from today's episode and every episode is at bain.com/founders-mentality. And we'll be back in 2 weeks. Until then, stay curious. Next time on Founders Mentality, the CEO Sessions.
I do strategy in the field. I don't do strategy in the boardrooms. When you get in discussions about generalities, you don't sense where are the issues. But when you get deep inside in the bakeries or in the sales centers, the small things, then from there you get the big ideas.